All right, Marcus from Heel Toe inside the Oh Giant Killer CRX with some sunroof tips. Honestly, this is one of the pieces that can get really finicky, but I think it's one of the greatest sort of features of these SIs. You know, for the weight penalty, you get a pretty huge sunroof. It takes up more than half of the roof, and that's on the outside. On the inside, it's just a really big panel. So I wanted to really make sure that this sunroof is working right. In order to do that, I took the whole thing apart and did all kind of adjustments. I got a new panel here. You might see this is our carbon fiber Medieval Pro panel. These are available for sale on the Heel Toe website. We also sell them in fiberglass. These panels get really rusty from the factory, so you can't buy replacements for them. You end up getting a used one, which is probably all rusty also. So our fiberglass and carbon panels are a really great replacement. To put it in, you're probably going to need to do some adjusting. So this video is going to give you some of the tips you'll need. The first thing that you'll probably find when your sunroof either maybe isn't working is maybe it's moving kind of slow, or maybe it's not lifting up the way it's supposed to, or closing the way it's supposed to, or it gets stuck somewhere in between. I'm going to go over all the different things that are involved with these sunroofs so that you can try to resolve some of those issues. In my particular situation, I'm doing sort of a full restoration on this car, so we'll just start with the very raw basic, which is I've got the headliner out of this car, and you can see that there's a black tray that holds the sunroof itself and the mechanism. Every mechanical piece of the sunroof is attached to this tray. There's some attachment points with bolts all the way around, and when all those bolts are out and then you disconnect the drain tubes and the electrical in the back, the whole sunroof comes out as a complete assembly. You'll want to get the actual panel off before you do that, and I'll show you that in a second. The panel won't probably want to come with everything, so panel off, these bolts, and then everything comes out. In my situation, I needed a way of operating the roof to open and close it because my car has no battery power, so I got this just regular car battery and some test leads, and through the regular harness here, there's a yellow and a red lead, and by jumping those, the sunroof will open or close. See, I've got this working, so that's pretty handy, and if you want it to close, you just switch the polarity. So yellow and red wires to power it, and that way at least you can open and close the sunroof if the switch isn't functioning at the time. The number one thing I was surprised to learn is after I had first reassembled this sunroof, it was having trouble closing. It was like getting kind of stuck and not really wanting to move. If that's happening, you can actually find it on the motor here, an Allen hole, which normally you would use the crank to manually and open and close the roof. But what I found is if you loosen the nut that's on there and snug it up, it'll actually tighten up a clutch mechanism. So if your sunroof seems like it needs more power to close or open, tighten up the clutch in here and it'll actually work a lot better for you. Don't do what a lot of people do, which is get up into the rails and spray a bunch of lube and stuff in there. That never works. Actually, probably your sunroof already has a bunch of crap in there that you need to clean out. We'll cover a couple points up there next. All right, so to get to a lot of the mechanism, you're going to want to get the sunroof panel off. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. First, you want to get the roof open all the way, and if yours isn't opening very well, use the hand crank on the inside to crank it all the way open. And you'll see really obviously there's this bolt right here, and you'll find that when you take that out, the sunroof panel still doesn't come off. So what you're going to need to do is actually disconnect it from the rear end too, which there's a rail here that the lift arm slides in, and in order to get the panel off the car, you need to remove this little nut. It's an 8mm nut. You can get it with an open end wrench. Magic of video, I already have it loosened for you here. But so when you take off this little nut, there's a black plastic stopper, and you kind of wiggle it. Don't be too rough with it because they can break. Yeah, so once you got these off of both sides, and take off these bolts holding the roof panel on in the front, you can kind of lift it here here, and it's just pivoting on that lift arm in the back. You're going to slide it forward a little bit, and then come underneath. That the lift arms have come pretty much all the way to the back, and there's a little hook that you can grab to just pull it off of the rail. Kind of see how that comes up. So index finger, oh, that one just came right off. So basically you're just going to kind of pull on that little tab and it'll get the slider out of the rail on the bottom. And now the roof panel is free. You can see that on this Medieval Pro panel, it's designed just exactly like the factory sunroof panel is. So all the attachment points are there. We even have little slots to put these little sliders into, which I found that not every roof has these, but these little sliders ride against the air deflector. So that's kind of a neat little feature that we've even built that in. So to install one of our panels, you're not going to do any fabrication, but you're going to transfer over all the hardware from your original panel to this one. These arms here that mount on the motor sliders, they're a little adjustable. So if you find that when you're putting the roof panel back on, if these don't line up, they're maybe a little too wide or something, you're gonna have to adjust these. In some cases, you might have to open up the holes a little bit. And also you might find that yours has a shim or something underneath here. That controls where the panel sits in the front. So if your roof is a little too low in the front, you'll shim here to raise it up. And if it's a little too high and there's a shim, take it out. The gasket around the outside is held on with little screws all the way around and a metal bracket. We find that even on like the oldest, crappiest sunroof panels, these seals can be replaced a lot of times. You just need to clean them up really good. Use a product called Shinetsu, which we have on the heel toe website, and it'll restore that rubber really well. And one thing also to note about this rubber is it doesn't actually provide a solid seal against the roof. Pretty much every sunroof leaks, and there are drains to address that. It helps to, if you're doing a thorough job, you can remove these rails and clean them out really well. Just get whatever gunk out that you can, because a lot of mechanics over time will probably just spray a bunch of shit in there, and it just sticks and keeps it from working well. So that's the panel itself. Next, we're going to move back over to the mechanism. Okay, here's a sunroof tray and mechanism and everything out of the car. I bought this one for some spare pieces. It looks pretty grimy. It probably looks a lot like how yours looks. Yeah, believe it or not, underneath all this is that bright aluminum. And you can get them all cleaned up, but just plan on spending a weekend doing it. So here's a little tour of what's going on here. Here you have the motor, and then there are cables that run inside these tubes, and it's all one assembly. So if you have a problem with one of your cables, you need a whole new motor assembly and everything. Easier said than done sometimes, but that's just the way that it works. The cables run forward and backwards out here, and they just run into these rubber tubes. And you've probably seen these tubes before. And all these do is just protect the cable when the sunroof is in the open position. So we can see that this sunroof is in the closed position now, and the cable is pretty much almost all the way in. It's not completely all the way in, but it's pretty close. One of the things that I ran into was my cable, one of my lifters broke. So this assembly right here is the lifter actuator, and it's part of the motor assembly. If you have a problem with the lifter actuator, you're gonna need a whole new motor and everything, which is kind of lame, but that's just the way that it works. Here's the actual mechanical lifter itself. Now the factory manual says that if the rear of your sunroof is opening up, it's too low when you close it, you can actually shim this guy up underneath here. When you close it, it drops down too low in the back, and you don't have any shims spacing it, then probably you're going to want to shim this here. Of course, you have to drop the whole thing down to do that. Here, if you want to replace something with the lifter actuator, you should be very careful never to really force your roof to do too much, because on mine, this little arm broke. And this arm, actually, the way that it works is the cable comes in, and then this little square thing on the end of the cable actuates this lever here. And you can actually see when you're operating a roof, this little guy clicks forward, and then that causes this to move backward, and then it'll drop the roof down in the back. If your roof is not dropping down or popping up the way it's supposed to, probably you have an issue either with the lifter or the lifter actuator. And if this little plastic piece is broken, there's nothing you can do. You have to replace it. You need to get a whole assembly to do that. I was actually able to, on mine, replace just the lifter actuator. You can see like all the original motor and everything is here. So I was able to swap mine out. It was kind of tricky what I had to do. On the end of the cable, you see this one doesn't have the little square thing on it anymore because I took it off. I had to take it off so that I could get the lifter actuator off the cable. In order to do that, I had to cut that little thing off. It doesn't come off normally, and then this crimped end on the cable, you're not going to be able to do anything with that. So what I did is I got an X-Acto knife and I heated it up with a little torch. Just used a really hot blade to cut through the flat end of that little guy, and I was able to get it off, just cutting off of one end. Popped it off of there, was able to get the lifter actuator off the cable, which was great. And I did the same thing with the roof in the car, slid the new actuator onto my panel assembly, and then to get the little black thing back on there, it actually snapped back on really well. Just put some super glue and held it gently with some vice grips while the super glue dried. Then it was all set. I also noticed on mine that all this work had previously done by the guy that had the car before me, and he just had like a metal crimp that he put on here, and so I guess that works too. You just need something fat enough to where when it pulls in, it'll actually actuate this little tab here. So yeah, that's replacing the lifter actuator. I'm sorry I don't have like video to actually show how that goes, but if you're inventive enough to get in here, you'll figure it out. I think the one other thing to note here is on this side there's this little electrical switch. It mounts right up against here, but on the opposing side, and what it does is you can see the little contact in there. When that little thing hits it and closes the switch, it stops the roof from going. That's your like limit switch. I don't know exactly how it works, but you know, because when you just push the button it'll keep running the motor, but whatever. The little electrical thing is part of the whole deal. Now you can see with the lifter actuator off of this side how the lift mechanism works. Yeah, the lifter actuator wants to like pull on this, drop it down, and push that to pop it up. So if you're not getting the up and down action, it's probably not this. This is a pretty resilient piece. It's probably maybe this little arm is broken. Most of this stuff can come apart, but you probably don't want to mess with it too much unless you have to. I think good solid cleaning and decent lubricant is most of the time all you really need. You see this roof, like this like barely moves because it's so full of crap. I wouldn't resort straight to increasing the torque on the motor. I would really take it apart. You can get all these arms out of here just by disassembling some screws and things and clean that out really well. That's going to be the primary key in making sure you don't have any other issues. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all you would really need to know. Take off and do some maintenance and play with your roof and get it working really super well. I hope this was really informative. The primary reason why I made this video is because I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of questions out there about how this stuff goes together and how it works. Even back to my days working at the dealership in the late 90s, like nobody really messed with these. They just spray crap in there and pray to God, and that doesn't work. You know, you got to drop the whole thing down, clean it out, and do some actual adjustments. And you know, you're going to use a factory service manual if you have one. Like I said, I'll scan these pages and link them to this video so that you can get all the skinny on what the factory says. That's it. Thanks a lot for watching. This video was brought to you by Heel Toe Automotive, where we're in your corner to get your Honda working just the way you need it to.